Welcome back, friends, to Now and Next, How the Church is Changing for Good, this webinar series where we are trying our very best as human beings to navigate this pandemic together. If you would like to look at our former episodes, you can find them on demand at amplifymedia.com/now and next. But today is one of those episodes where we're going to really tap into our humanity, what it looks like for us not just to be personas or pastors or church leaders, but individuals who are also journeying through quite an unknown season in our lives. Throughout this survey where we've curated information across 1,000 church leaders, one of the top 4 concerns that came up was just feeling overwhelmed. And so in today's webinar, we're going to talk about this universal need for self-care. What does it look like for mind, body, and soul for us to feel whole and wellness in the midst of this pandemic? I know for me personally, everything feels like a thing. It feels like we are being stretched in ways that, and there's no manual to know how it is from the rising of the sun to the going down of the same, how it is we're supposed to show up in the world. And as individuals who are absorbing the traumas of the people around us, whether in our congregations or in our communities, and then also trying to hold space for ourselves, it can be an overwhelming task to figure out how it is to care for self as we also care for others. So today, I don't just simply show up as a pastor. I show up as a human being. And the second week of being in quarantine, I really had kind of a come to Jesus moment where I had to say to God, I don't know that I can do this. If you've read my bio, oftentimes I'm described as a glutton for joy. I mean, I wake up on the right side of the bed pretty much 364 days out of the year. And but this quarantine, this pandemic was not on my kind of 2020 goals of navigating and showing myself to be a great pastor. And as much as I am an individual who loves to work, I just could not make things happen. I didn't have an inspiring word for my congregation within the first 2 weeks of kind of living within this new reality, and was feeling incredibly sad. If I had to name the chief emotion that I was wrestling with as a pastor, but also as a person, it was grief. Grieving that the way in which I had understood ministry was never going to be, and that also too what it was going to look like to come out on the other side, that was also going to be very different. And then this kind of in-between wilderness space was something that really stretched my humanity. And so in having conversation, actually the second week of shelter in place with my therapist, she said to me, Lisa, if you are going to lead and love people based off of your instincts, you're going to also need to love yourself well. And the way you're going to love yourself well is with self-care practices. And so that's where we're going to land today. We are going to love and lead well, but we're going to do so by also being good self-managers and also leaning into self-care. So I come to this place with that wonderful Wesleyan question between my head and my heart, which is, how is it with your soul? How is it with your soul? That may be the means by which we keep ourselves honest, even in the midst of this conversation, that as you hear from our conversation partners today, that you might continue to ask yourself, how is it with your soul? So I'm so excited to introduce the individuals who are going to help us not just hold on to information, but also turn that into transformation. I want to introduce to you Ginger Gaines Sorelli. I know, mute.
Mute. Let me tell you how it is with my soul. My soul is weary of having to manage the clicker. Talking when I'm on mute, etc. That's part of what I think I've been trying to navigate and deal with as we've moved into this time of everything being in a box. And through wires and technology. And I have been, over the years, I was just reflecting with my therapist this morning about my own journey to come to a place of integration of my words and my body, because there was a time when all of my life was about dance and incarnation. And I used to say words aren't my thing, which I think is highly ironic at this point in my life. But it was this whole, like, expressing yourself with your body. It's about being with people. It's about being in the flesh. It's about being in the community. It's about reaching out and touching people and being down in the mess of that lived reality. And all of a sudden, I can't touch any of my people. All I'm doing is trying to navigate clickers and mute buttons and all that stuff. Anyway, that's how it is with my soul. But let me tell you who I am. So I am the pastor of senior pastor, Boundary United Methodist Church in Washington, D.C. I've been there it'll be 6 years in July. And it's the joy of my life to be a pastor and to serve that congregation right now. It's been quite a number of years to be serving a church a mile from the White House. And we continue to not be bored. In the last several years, have organized a lot of our social justice work under the banner of Sacred Resistance. I wrote a book about that as a theological framework and practical way to think about how we engage faithfully as citizens of the kingdom in such a polarized world. So that's kind of my grounding.
Ginger, we're glad to have you. I also want to introduce our next panelist, Chazz Howard.
Hi, everyone. I was aware as I was thinking about how to introduce myself that I usually lead with kind of what I do and job titles and things like that. But what I've done the last several weeks, I guess the last couple months, has been very homebound. And then the titles that I think I'm most aware of are like dad and, gardener and dog walker, bad lunch maker. Like those are sort of the things that I am doing. And I think that that's okay in a sense that the things that are in my sort of bio on websites haven't been very much at the front of my mind. I think there's a good and a difficult part of that. And so when I introduce myself as I'm an Episcopal priest, I'm the university chaplain at the University of Pennsylvania here in Philadelphia. In many ways, I haven't been able to sort of physically live into that. And similar to what Ginger was saying, like I haven't been able to celebrate communion. I haven't been able to sort of sit with my students during finals period right now. Or I should say it's happening in a very different way. And I think that kind of connects to how I'm doing in my soul, how it is with my soul. I think when I thought about the question, I think there have been times in my life where I felt like my soul was flying. Kirk Jones would say soaring. I think there have been times in my life where I felt like I was running. And then some of the worst times in my life, I think I felt like my soul was very still in a painful stillness, in a kind of curled up in a ball stillness. I think right now it feels like my soul is tenderly walking with some trepidation, yet walking. And the image I have is sort of a little person like holding an adult's hand while nervous, but still sort of looking up. That sort of feels like how my soul is right now. And that's enough.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Chazz. We're also really grateful to have with us Ann Williams.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ann, and I serve as an associate pastor at Church of the Resurrection in the Kansas City area. I have the privilege of being a care pastor at the downtown campus. And so I get to talk about care and lead care a lot in my community, and it's my favorite thing to do. So this has been a fun new challenge and also a lot of grieving. I think, like Chazz said, parenthood has really shaped my perspective of this. Before like COVID-19 was a thing, my life was pretty carefully organized as a part-time pastor. So if there's any part-time pastors, you know that that's kind of real and kind of funny, like, you know, it's sort of possible. But I had kind of carefully managed a routine and a rhythm that kept me home and sort of ignoring church work for a couple days a week, every week, to be with a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old at home. And then I would just kind of shut all of that off, and like it was very compartmentalized. And now I'm kind of, you know, all of that is all of the routines and the organization of how things were kind of barely staying together. It's all mushed up in a big pot together. And so I think that has really shaped like how I'm processing all of this, is constantly having 2 little guys around here and watching everything I do. It's helping me make choices about how I use my time, because every time I'm doing something for work, I'm ignoring them. And vice versa. Every time I do something and be present with them, I'm ignoring the people that I love and care for at work. And so how is it with my soul? What I feel like is I feel very, very humbled. And I don't mean like in the good way. I feel like kind of like embarrassed, humbled, that like there were ways that I had set up my life to kind of make it seem like it was all going okay. And I feel like all of those kind of systems that were in place have sort of like crumbled. And now like the reality, like I can't fake it anymore. It's like, oh, this was actually the truth all along. And now it's just become like abundantly clear. And it's pretty hard to hide it. So there's a door back there, and anything could be happening on the other side of that door right now. I have no idea. And I'm really grateful for an awesome like co-parenting partner, my spouse. But yeah, so that's a little bit about me and where I'm at today.
And then lastly, we want to introduce Curtis Zachary.
Cheers, everyone. Yeah, this is an incredible opportunity to spend time together in this way, simply because of all the things that have been stated, just the reality that everything is fluid on a day-to-day basis. And just to have a chance to be able to have this conversation is a gift, even to us here. So to be able to invite anyone else to this table, I think is great, simply because I think we all will benefit from just sitting together and celebrating the idea of stewardship of the soul, so to speak. And similarly to Chazz as well, you know, I think titles have always been an interesting thing for me. I think just from a sense of anchoring people's expectations. You know, I'm a teaching pastor at a church here in Franklin, Tennessee. I wrote a book called Soul Rest, and that was an important part of my journey. But I really do feel like I'm just a beggar trying to show other beggars where the bread is. I'm just a regular dude seeking to find nourishment and strength from the way of Jesus, and seeking the leadership of the Spirit. And I'm hungry and thirsty every day for those things. And I think this season has been a beautiful chance to be able to find synergy and camaraderie with so many different people who normally would view who you are in your vocation as this separator or distinction. But there's almost this inherent, what you would hope to be true anyway, but an inherent leveling of the playing field, so to speak, in that we're all walking alongside each other, seeking refreshment and guidance and insight that inherent power structures that come with churches and organizations provide. But when those things are taken away, you know, we're all here seeking the same things, and that should always be true. But I love the fact that that is clearly presenting itself in these times. And I pray that in these days ahead, just as Anne shared, there's this picture of the humbling or the shaping of what this time represents for our own vocation or position. But I think just these rhythms that are established, I think there are going to be some beautiful things that result from this time. And I think God is forming and shaping those things in my life as well. So as for the condition of my soul, I think it's both pliable and being formed in this time.
Mm. You know, self-care can be a difficult topic to talk about because we can, in various ways, struggle to put ourselves first. But I'd love to just ask you, how are you caring for yourself?
I'll jump in. There's a quote by Soren Kierkegaard that has absolutely challenged me on a daily basis since I read it. He says, "It is absolutely unethical when one becomes so busy communicating that he forgets to be what he teaches." Mm. And I think that's been something that has continually brought awareness to the need for the invitation of shepherding for my own soul by God and his Spirit, and also the attentiveness that I can take toward leaning in. And so, as has already been shared, you know, the variables are many. I have 2 little kids. I have a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old, beautiful wife, a lot of moving parts at home. And so we may have aspirations toward ideas of beautiful, long, extended times on the porch with a book and a coffee, or maybe long walks, but those things aren't currently present. And so I think for me, it's just taken one continual granting of permission to say that it's okay not to be okay in this moment, while holding the tension that whether I believe it or not in this moment, there's a living hope in Jesus Christ. And so I think that has been a gift for me, which has led to finding momentary places, you know, maybe 10 minutes with a book and a coffee, maybe holding a coffee as I'm going, but inviting the rhythm of the Spirit and his presence as I'm going, which wouldn't measure up to a beautiful time away in a library or a study or an office, but just trying to find these spots where I feel like I'm not trying to hold my own health. I'm trying to give it over to the one who can do it for me.
Yeah, I relate to that. I think, especially what you said at the end, I feel like I've always tried to, previously, like self-care was getting away. And it's like, whether it's just like an hour pedicure or whatever, it's getting away. And now it's like, I have to find it here in the midst of the chaos. And so for me, it's been trying to figure out how to find that peace within and in those small moments right here in the everyday chaos of what's going on. And learning that for me has a lot to do with self-talk. It has a lot to do with the mental game, and that how I talk to myself becomes like, you know, God's voice in my life, and are the things that are playing in the background all the time, are they God's truth in my life, or are they something else from somewhere else? And so I've been trying really hard to find ways of managing that inner dialogue that's going on for me.
Oh, anyone, just hop on in there.
Go, Chazz.
Sure. Well, I so appreciate. I just want to kind of soak up what everyone's saying. I'm blessed by the wisdom in here, and Curtis kind of messed me up with that quote, man. That was oof. I'm gonna look that up after this conversation. How have I been taking care of myself? I mean, I think I'm thankful that I feel like God's been sort of taking care of me through others around me, and the kind of nudging by people who care about me too. So to make sure that I am talking to people. And so I tell all of the folks who work in campus ministry on our campus the import of being in a therapeutic relationship. And, every single person who goes into ministry of any sort, this is one of the first pieces of advice that I give them, is to make sure that you're in some type of relationship, whether it's a psychologist or a spiritual director, but something more than just a buddy or like a sibling on the phone. I think that, and to me, that's been important for me. I'm thankful for where I once upon a time kind of scoffed at kind of teletherapy kind of stuff. Like, who would ever do that? Now I'm so thankful for that kind of stuff now too. Or speaking on the phone. I also live in a part of the country where in a part of our area where I can go for walks. And so just being outside and letting the sun kind of hit my bald head has been so important for me. And on those walks, I like to listen to stuff. And so I was telling a friend, I feel like I'm traveling in time every time I go on one of these walks, where I either listen to like music that I loved in middle and high school and college that sort of takes me back to good days, or I have this like running playlist of music I want to play at the celebration parties after the page is turned on this global crisis. And so I have like all this like really happy party music and like techno and all that kind of stuff that I sort of look forward to what will be, or what I kind of pray will be. And then I also I have no shame. I have my sad list too. And it's helped me to kind of have the cries that I need to have right now. And, you know, I don't know what I look like walking down the street with tears streaming down my face on one block and kind of dancing on a whole nother block on the same walk, but help music and kind of being outside and talking it through has helped me kind of process what's going on in here in, I think, healthy-ish ways.
Well, I'll jump in there. I have some similar practices that have been grounding for me. I've been trying to pay attention to what's been grounding for me. It's been week by week different. One of the ways that I think about life in general, but certainly challenging moments of life, is being in a storm. And I think I always go back to that story of Jesus on the boat in the storm, and the disciples who get on the boat and get really aggravated because Jesus is asleep. This is a really grounding story for me when I'm feeling anxious. It was a story that was given to me when I was on spiritual retreat, because one of my practices is to do an annual retreat, which I'm not going to get to do this summer, which is part of my grief. But one year on my retreat, I was given that story. And so the images from that always get me. But one of the things that I think about is the waves and riding the waves. And so I've been part of what I've been trying to do is to give myself daily permission to ride the wave. If I'm up, to let myself be up and not feel bad about that, like I'm supposed to be feeling terrible and sad. No, I get to be up today. I'm having a moment. Yay! It's an up moment. I'm going to go with that. Because you know that the waves you're going to hit a big one. It's going to knock you over, or you're going to get in a place where you feel like you're drowning. And I'm there too. And so saying, well, today is a day I have no idea what I did. It's now 10 p.m. I usually go to bed much earlier. For some reason, I'm still awake. And I feel terrible. I don't know what I did all day. And saying, that's all right. I'm going to ride the wave. Tomorrow, I'm just going to keep riding it. In that story, one of the things that always helps me is one of the insights that I was given is I used to, initially kind of blame Jesus because the disciples followed him on the boat. They wouldn't have gotten on the boat if they weren't following Jesus. I'm like, well, that's aggravating. You put us out in this boat in the middle of a storm. But Jesus is asleep. And so it's always that promise of like, how do you do that? How do you get to do that? I want to do that. I want to be able to be at peace and sleeping in the midst of all of this. How can I connect to that peace? And so that's been one of my kind of grounding images, is this invitation I was given in that story to follow Jesus, not just into the boat, into the storm, into the ministry and the work and the trying to navigate and ride the waves, but to be able to follow Jesus into his rest, into his sort of laying back and letting God just hold me, hold with whatever. And so that's been, I go back to it over and over and over again, is that promise of being held and to know that we can ride the waves. It's going to be all right. And I garden a lot too. I like to dig in the dirt. And the other thing that has been very key for me is to find as many opportunities to dance and laugh as possible. I do dance parties in the house. For me, it's 80s music. I'm not going to lie.
I rock with St. Biggie Smalls, so this fine.
It's like full on dance party in the house by myself. Mm-hmm. Dancing with myself is on my quarantine playlist.
Mm-hmm. One thing about self-care is that it's obviously not, it should not be one-dimensional, and that we need to show up kind of our whole selves, spiritual, mental, and also physical. I'd love to hear, how you think those three relate, those three dynamics, how they relate to one another, and then how they might show up in our daily practices for caring for ourselves. I know for me, I have been incredibly committed to working out every single day. I have to move my body in some particular way. For me, it's like shaking off the trauma, to be perfectly honest. So I just love to hear the daily practices that might bring those three aspects together: the spiritual, the physical, and then also the mental component of self-care. You're all such reflective individuals.
So this is probably silly, but maybe it'll spark something for somebody else. I love peppermint oil. There's something about just smelling, and so sometimes I'll just dab it right on the end of my nose, and it's just like, oh yeah, like just breathing in something that makes me feel calm and kind of like refreshed and inspired. I love a good foot bath. I love stretching honestly will do me so much good, and just fresh air. And I feel like so many times the physical things help get my mind back in the right spot. And it's definitely all interconnected for me. Anybody else? Peppermint oil? I highly recommend it.
Aromatherapy is a thing. It's a thing. It's a real thing.
Yeah, peppermint oil has definitely been a remedy for headaches many times for me. But I was thinking when you were talking about the Shema, and it talks about how we're to love the Lord our God with all our heart, our mind, our soul, and our strength. And I think one of the biggest gifts for me in the realization of the need for rest in life was these words weren't just poetic license. They weren't just this very figurative, comprehensive covering of the self. It was very practical. To love the Lord your God with all your heart is your emotion center, everything that you are feeling. To love the Lord your God with all your mind is indeed engaging your thinking, your soul, obviously giving over your fullness of your being connective to what it means spiritually. But I do believe strength as well. And there is a pathway, as Ann just shared, that opens up some abilities for us to be able to commune with God. I think for me, running is indeed that. When I go on a run, I feel like there are emotional connective places that I don't have access to unless I'm moving in that way. And so, I definitely feel like there's a complete and total rhythm. And I think that rhythm is intentional. I don't think it's something that we've stumbled upon. I think God built us so that we would experience sustenance, strength, wholeness in every aspect there. And we also know, especially in times like this, certain aspects of those things find themselves to be deficient. And what I love about the Shema is almost like a hurricane, in that there's no one pathway in. There may be a different entry point, and one of those things might be more abundant in a certain season where you're drawing from that well. Maybe you're able to right now on a quarantine time just get out and do exercise, run, and but you're not getting that communion with your people like you were talking about earlier, Ginger. And I think about what that looks like for our lives, and knowing that if those things are out of balance, there's a way to draw from those different sections, but we hope that we can get all of those things working together in rhythm.
Rich stuff. I think I've felt this intersection of these different aspects of self when I've been outside in the garden. And we've had a lot of rain in some sense in our area, and a lot of weeds have kind of grown up outside of our home. And so I've found myself from time to time like pulling these weeds up. And as I'm doing that, I feel like I'm praying that God will kind of weed out the virus out of our society. God will kind of do this to our world for us. And it allows me to kind of, sort of physically embody a prayer But while I'm out there, I'm also thankful that I'm not in front of a screen. I don't have my phone. I don't want that to fall in my pocket in the dirt. I don't have the computer on. And so like literally physically, my eyes can just rest. I don't have to worry about sort of the mic being muted. I don't have to worry about responding to emails or the phone, or watching my show or anything like that. I'm really thankful to physically be away from all that kind of stuff before. So it's funny. I hadn't thought about it as a kind of holistic intersection of mind, body, and soul. But in a lot of ways, I guess that's why I keep getting drawn back out there to it.
I had a major panic early on that I was not working out the way that I had started. I had finally gotten myself on a rhythm. This is part of the thing that I've been wrestling with is I have these waves of not only grief, but I'm just mad. I'm mad. I'm mad about all these things that were on a great trajectory. I'm mad about there was, what's that called when everything's momentum. Thank you. That's the word. Thank you. Momentum. There was momentum. There was momentum in so many different areas of life and work and ministry. And it had been so long, and I had been trying to get on a good, healthy, that was the piece that had been missing for me, was the workout rhythm. And I had finally done it. And then this happened, and I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't go and participate in that, and it just interrupted all of it. And so and I was really panicked that I was going to fall off the exercise wagon, and then I'll never get back on it, and I'm going to feel crummy again. And this is so important, So that's been part of the thing. It's huge. It's a huge piece is to try to, and I'm grateful to be reminded, it's all, we can always be drawing from this and that, and that's helpful. But man, I was like it was affecting me deeply. I'm working it.
You
From home, I'm working it 3 times a week is my goal.
Yeah.
2 weeks in a row, I've got there.
Yeah. Well,
we'll see. I don't know how long it's going to last.
I also think there's something about having a reverence for this pandemic, meaning that our metric and our standards have to change. That if we base a metric on what life was like on March 1st, it almost feels cruel. But to say, gosh, if I can work out 3 times this week in the midst of a pandemic, maybe that is like worth celebrating. To say that, during a global crisis, we still moved our bodies, which I'm going to actually ask a 2-pronged question to you all. So one, what are some of the dangers you think that pastors will face if they don't take time for self-care? So that's the first part of the question. Here's the second one. When you start to feel bad about making space for self-care, what's the one-liner that you say to yourself? So what's the danger that you think pastors will face if they don't take time for self-care? And then sometimes when the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy and tells you, listen, do you really have time to bake those organic sweet potatoes? Shouldn't you be working on a video production? What's the one-liner that you tell yourself about why self-care matters?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. Eugene Peterson has been a great mentor from afar when it comes to this whole idea of self-care and stewardship. And he said something that has definitely brought calibration in this way. He said, how can I lead people beside the quiet, still waters if I'm in perpetual motion? And that's the danger. We invite people into this rest-filled reality connective to the way of Jesus, and yet we're not drinking deeply of it ourselves. And one of the things that I feel like is the greatest gift of what it means to be a connective follower of Jesus Christ is that before anything else, he desires communion with us. Yes, even us who are inviting other people into knowing who he is. And so our value, our worth, our identity are not found in what we do, but whose we are. And I think the greatest danger is that we offer up services from an empty well. And that is both sad and terrifying because we all know we can still be quote unquote effective, even coming from a place of a lack of rest. And I would say the thing that I tell myself when I start to feel like it's threatening my right to be able to do that is another quote. I feel like I'm the quote guy now. I don't know why.
That's okay. Curtis, quote away.
They're coming to my head.
Hashtag quote all day long, Curtis.
But Parker Palmer wrote this book, Let Your Life Speak. And he said, self-care is never a selfish act. It's the simply stewardship of the only gift that I've been given, the gift of myself. And so, again, another reminder to say, I don't really have anything truly substantive to offer from my own strength, number one. Number two, if I'm doing things even in the name of God in my own strength, it's still driven by my own ability and sustenance. But then three, I think the gift of self-care is that we can do the work that we can in our own effort to, whether it's running or golf or weeding or, gardening and all those different things. But still, we need to bring our full self before the only one who can provide the refreshment that we really long for. And as people who are seeking to serve others and invite them into that rest-filled reality, man, it is vital. It's not only just important, it is absolutely vital that we give ourselves permission to do it.
So good.
I'm going to just say, I think one of the dangers, if we don't take care of ourselves, are the same dangers that other folks can fall into in places of isolation, despair, fear, anxiety. And that is, what are our unhealthy go-tos?
Mm-hmm.
We can drink too much. We can eat the things that make us sick. And if we're at this for months at a time, what are you putting in your body? We cannot move in ways that are healthy. We can get into stuff online that's unhealthy. I'm just saying, I think if we're not attending to really honest self-care, we are humans. You started us there, Lisa. It's like saying, I am a human being. I'm not a role. We all have roles and we need to hold them well and be mindful of, but we're human beings. And so the same temptations and dangers are going to be there for us when we're in places of loneliness and disconnection and disorientation and weariness and boredom. Wherever people are finding themselves. And so I just want to say that really clearly. We need to be, and it goes back to therapy, it goes back to meaningful human connection that helps us be honest with ourselves. It goes back to prayer, real prayer, where God shows us ourselves and what we need to see. But I think that's a danger I think I want to just name. I'm mindful of it in my own life. So I'm not saying, let me tell you the thing. I am aware of some of those slippery slopes that can happen. So, and the other thing I think for me, to answer your second question, I often think about, who do I really think I am that I need to work I was going to say a sort of curse word. Who am I to think that I need to work all the time? Am I that important? This is the way I talked. I was an athlete among a so it's the coach. It's like, who do you think you are? You need to get off the court now. you need to sit it out. You're not the only person on this team. Mm-hmm. So it's about humility. It's about remembering that God is God and I'm not. And there are lots of people who can step up, and the world is not going to stop turning if I take a nap or go in the garden or sit on my porch and watch the birds at the feeder and in the bird bath, which I do a lot these days. Yeah.
That's really good. I just want to jump in because I feel like you were confessing some good stuff. I think for me, I had the same realization. I felt like God said to me one time, when you're unable to rest, it's like you're saying, I can't do my work without your help. And it was such a direct challenge that it just put me in my proper place and gave me perspective to remember exactly what you were just talking about. So thank you for reminding me / challenging me again. I appreciate that.
Ginger, to your first point about what we do with our fears and anxieties and boredom and grief and all those things, it's so true that all of that stuff inside of us finds its way out in one way or another. And better to handle those things in healthy ways that process stress. Working out, exercising, eating well, talking it through with a therapist, journaling, praying it through, confess, all that kind of stuff, rather than drowning our anxieties and stress with alcohol, weed, sex, pornography, all that kind of stuff. That's such an important thing. Then I think that all of those feelings are turned up now in this real moment of global strain and anxiety and stress. And so I think you're right that the temptation to kind of turn to unhealthy ways of processing that stuff is even greater than it was 3 months ago. And so I think a part of the self-care of making sure we process what's going on in here isn't just to kind of guard against burnout and to be faithful with the charge and the call that God has given us. But a part of it is also to model for parishioners, those who are watching us as well, but also so we don't have a disaster. And I think the potential for those really, really big mistakes is much higher now, that everything's turned up to a 10 than it was before. I'm really glad you brought that super important point up.
Yeah, I think for me, I appreciate everything you guys are saying. And I kind of wanted to say like, yes, amen, without adding anything. For me, the thing that I was thinking about is comparison and comparing to other people and other professionals and other people in other positions. And I don't know if you guys have seen it. I didn't create it, but the meme that kind of talks about we're all in the same storm, but we're not in the same boat. And so depending on our position, depending on our life, like family, home life situation, depending on 1,000 different things, like we're all in the same storm, but we have different realities within that storm. And so for me, I think like I run the risk of not remembering, like, so for me, that's tricky because I wish there could just be a prescription for self-care, right? There's like, do these things. All right, then we're all good, you know? And it looks like this for everyone, and this will work for everyone. That would be so nice. But I think what's so hard about this is we have to lead ourselves, like between us and God. And like you guys have been saying, trusted, companions for the journey. Like it takes a lot of digging and inner work to figure out like, what do I really need? So the person next door, the person down the street, they're finding what works for them. And we pray they are, but I can't just plug and play into my life. I have to figure out like, what are my issues? What does care look like for me? And so for me, I think the fear is like, or the downside of what happens when we don't do this is like comparison, resentment. And for me, I really fear like a hardening of my heart. And so the one line for me, it has to do with like stewardship and seeing what I have, everything about inside of me, my body, the gifts that I've been given are a gift given from God. And that's a really hard, like assumption, because I often like have this very low self-confidence and don't see myself as a gift to anything or anyone. But if I can see that like anything that I have is a gift, then it's my job to steward it. So for me, the one line is like, and it's not yours. It's a gift God gave you, and it's your job to steward it. And so it's another act of faithfulness, not selfishness, to be, participating in self-care and to act in ways that care for myself. That's an act of faithfulness toward the gift that God gave me. I don't know if
No, that's good. I want to ask one more question before we take some time for a break. And, I do feel like, and I've kind of said this before, that sometimes crisis cultivates creation or innovation. And I'm watching colleagues and friends and individuals in my community find creative ways to engage in self-care when some of our agency has been taken away. I can't go get a pedicure anymore. People are getting on Zoom calls. They're connecting with family members, going to club quarantine. I mean, there's a lot that folks are doing to kind of provide for themselves. What are some of the creative ways that you are seeing people engage self-care practices? And I might even add this, what are some of the maybe creative self-care practices that we see lifted up in our spiritual ancestors that we might want to draw on during this time? I know it's a lot. We can always pick up after the fact. So just start and we'll see where we go.
I'll jump in with one. It's been really a gift for me. So as I think all of you have alluded to, people are a big part of our lives. For me, I would say more than anything else, I get to spend time over coffee with a lot of people. And that's something that I greatly miss in this season of time. And so I think one creative way that kind of came to me to both build up my faith and then also remember my friends was a new type of fasting. So when you are fasting from food, you feel hungry, you get that pang in your stomach and you begin to pray to invite God to replace the thing that you're withholding from. And so I've been feeling a lot of pangs in me and not being able to be with people. And so as I remember my friends or a regular brother that I've been spending time in the Word with, or people that I've been connecting with over coffee, when I think about them, I've been taking time to just set aside time to pray, almost as though it were a fast from food, but it's a fast from this interpersonal relationship. And it's been really cool because I think for me, it's brought connective rhythm for me in prayer. But then also it's kept me mindful of my friends so that I would, one, reach out and text and see how they're doing, but then two, be more intentional in prayer for them and not allow the rhythm of ministry and relationship to dissipate simply because we're not in proximity. So that was one that was surprising to me. I didn't plan that out. It was just something that God kind of nudged me with, but it's been really helpful to remain connective in my mind and in my heart, but then also for me to keep that rhythm of prayer for intentional places going forward.
So I've seen a couple of really people offering their gifts to the world online. So I have a good friend who works in, some of you will know Helen Ride. I'm just going to call her out right here. But she does like something called, she's from England, but she's now an American citizen, recently made that official, I think. But she does like this thing on Facebook where she just like explains random British things, like what this word means or what this food is or what, and it's hilarious. She's absolutely hilarious, like silly British, I can't remember the name of it, I wish I could. But anyway, it's stuff like that. I see people just sort of offering what they have. Like the woman with her one jar of oil. They're just pouring it out and they're saying, here's what I've got. And somehow it seems to be enough. It's like there are people just soaking up these little, just quirky gifts that people are offering, which I think is beautiful. Playing music, doing all sorts of things. So I think that's been really cool to see people just offer themselves and in case it might be a gift to somebody. And the thing that I think of in terms of what the like the resources, creative resource, I mean, I don't know if there's something about letting yourself lament and the way, I just have been reflecting on this week, so it's probably why it came to mind, but the ways that lament help us move into a place of gratitude and praise. And so I think like it's that movement in the Psalms, it's the movement that we see so often of ancestors at various parts of our history as a human family, that we see when people are in a place of suffering, they allow themselves to lament and to bring their cries of lament before God. And then in the midst of that, there is a way that somehow God's grace gets in there and helps turn that towards something that reminds us that we're not alone, that God's in it with us, and that we can move into a space of gratitude. And so there's something really, for me, that's a very creative space, kind of an Easter creative space, and moving through the lament into promise. That's what comes to mind.
The first thing that came to mind was in my neighborhood, every couple of days, someone is like chalk bombing the sidewalks and the streets, and they're drawing rainbows, which has, I think, become one of the cool symbols of hope of the moment. And then that kind of turned into like encouraging messages, like "hang in there, we got this," or "thank you, healthcare workers." And on trash day, they wrote sort of "thank you, trash collectors." And I was walking the dog one day, and I caught, it was a parent and a kid duo who kind of go out there with like a bucket of chalk and did just working hard, tagging the street. And it's such a tiny, low budget kind of creative way of working, but they spread so much, I can't help but smile at seeing like the misspelled encouraging messages out there. And it's beautiful, and I love it, and I'm thankful for it,
We haven't talked too much about it, but I mean, I just see a lot of people saying like, I'm off the news, and I don't know what it's like in DC, so you don't really have that privilege, I guess. But like, listen, I'm not watching the news, like I'm not reading the news, like, so you're talking about fasting, and people in Kansas City or some people, it's like, I can't do it. And that's a luxury. That's a privilege, right? So obviously we're getting some news, like we're hearing things that are going on. We know like local stuff. And I know that's probably privilege, the ability to be able to do that. But are there ways of limiting our news? That feels like a theme that I'm seeing of like, I've got to get the highlights today, or watch an hour at 10 o'clock news or 6 o'clock news, and then that's it. Or how do we keep that in check? I think it's really important.
One of the things I talk about a lot and think about a lot is balancing the bad news with the good, and intentionally seeking out good news stories. And there are places that do that, like resources that you can do that and get that stuff regularly in your feeds. I mean, so that's one of the things that I do. Like I get certain emails every morning that are giving me a good news story. Like someone in the world that was in a paper somewhere, some local paper, some person doing a loving thing, a generous thing, sidewalk chalk, changing the community, but it just reminds us that the human family is not just the bad news, that it's not just the bad news, that we're part of a world that has so much beauty and goodness in it. And we don't always see that in the headlines, but there's more of that than the bad stuff, I'm convinced.
This has just been such a beautiful conversation already. I wanted to say that it's been like manna, but actually it's been maybe even greater than manna. This is more like milk and honey kind of conversation. It's post-wilderness conversation. We're going to actually take a quick break. We're going to hear from our sponsor, Amplify Media, and then we'll come back and continue with the second part of our conversation.
Amplify is a space in which Christians can explore their faith more deeply in relationship with one another and be equipped to impact even more people for the gospel. You can even stream your church's services, bringing your congregation together even when they aren't in the same building. Engage your ministry and expand your mission by following these simple steps. Get started with Amplify today.
Well, welcome back. We are really looking forward to the second part of this conversation. And I just want to maybe just start with this question around holding space. So as pastors and church leaders, spiritual leaders, we're watching people deal with financial loss, the loss of health, disappointment, grieving, a myriad of emotions. And because of where we are, our position in this world, being on the front line spiritually, we can absorb the trauma of other people as we're trying to hold space for them, let alone even sometimes the personal traumas that we are dealing with in our own lives. what are some of the warning signs that you have seen in pastors as they're trying to hold space for others and also holding space for themselves?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest gifts we can give ourselves is the acknowledgement and admission that there is and has been trauma. I think sometimes in our effort to be those leaders, as you just alluded to, or people who are holding space for others or living in that tension, we want to almost absolve ourselves from the sense that trauma has affected us. But I think, one, acknowledging that hard things are hard things, no matter how you shake it. And whether you enter into that with someone on their behalf or something happens to you, trauma is trauma. So giving yourself permission to acknowledge that is huge. I think simple things like you find yourself laughing less, you find yourself withdrawing from people, you find yourself increasingly moving away from the things that gave you life before. I mean, it's very simple things, but I would say, connected to your question, the warning signs usually are pretty obvious, and they're usually things that are a regular part of our rhythms. And I think it's in those moments when you start to recognize these little things, whether that's through a spouse or your community, kind of acknowledging some things about yourself. One, finding, as you guys have done an incredible job talking about throughout all of this, having people who have that permission to speak into your life. But then number two, once they do, giving yourself the permission to own the reality that we all need stewardship when it comes to trauma. I think real quick, it just makes me think too, with this whole stay-at-home order, the world is experiencing a trauma right now. And because it's the whole world, it doesn't necessarily feel like that because everybody's going through the same thing. But we don't realize that we are all being jolted and jostled in a way that none of us, I mean, Ginger did an incredible job of articulating earlier on about how disappointment, pain, anger enter in because, man, this is not what we signed up for. And so for all of us to forcibly experience this is indeed a trauma. So we need to pay attention to that, all of us, and then from there kind of lean into what that looks like.
I just cry randomly. Mm-hmm. Like sometimes I just want to cry. I don't know why. I think that's a sign. I also think that the crying is probably a good, healthy thing. Again, so it's like I was trying to say before, I don't know if I said it well, but to give yourself permission to like ride that wave. Like, okay, I need to cry right now because that's going to hopefully let me purge a little bit or release some of the trauma in my own self. It gives, maybe that's the sign. If I pay attention to it, I can. But I think for me, that's one thing we might pay attention to. Are you just feeling sad? Are you feeling like you want to cry and you don't really know why? Those simple signs, again, some of the things that just naming it when it comes up. Because I think one of the things for me is that it's very hard to lose. I just keep, I'm like, okay, I gotta push through this next wall. Okay, I gotta do this thing. I've got to figure this thing out. And I don't stop and say, oh, there's something going on with me. Why am I feeling weepy? Does that make sense? Because we are all, I feel like I'm still having to make big decisions that are affecting hundreds and hundreds of people. I'm having to speak in some ways to more people than I'm used to speaking to in the public square on a regular basis. All of that is out there all the time. So I'm constantly having to think about all that outward stuff. And so I think part of what's hard for me is to step back and be like, what? To notice what's going on in my own self. Like, am I withdrawing? Why am I biting? Why am I literally like biting my spouse's head off right now? Of course, that never happens. I'm just talking about someone else. But like, why do I want to burst into tears? What is that? And then giving ourselves permission to sort of own it. I think those are certain signs if we're paying attention.
Thanks for sharing that. I think that's a sign for me is like resistance to dreaming about the future. I've been struggling with this in my community. People are like talking about, okay, when we reopen, when would we reopen? What would that look like? What would we do? And I'm like, nope, I don't want to talk about it. I have such a resistance because I don't want to be disappointed again. And that's all about hope. Like we're trying to study hope right now. And it's really hard because like, I know like I am a person of hope. Like, like I am a person of resurrection. Like this is my identity in Christ. And yet, like, it's not that I don't have hope for the future. It's just that I am preparing myself or almost like putting walls up for being disappointed again. Because it feels so far off. So I don't know if that makes sense or if anybody else relates to that, but this feeling of like resistance to dreaming about the future. Chazz, earlier when you're talking about like having songs in mind that you're going to play at like celebration or like whatever, I'm like, I don't even go there because that's too vulnerable for me. That feels like to put my heart on the line like that feels really risky right now.
The signs that we often can pay attention to, it's a cliche, but it's so true. The body keeps score. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I think that's true with stress. I think it's also true in trauma. The kind of stressful signals of like kind of around our shoulders and neck or back pain. When I have experienced trauma in my life, I got into a car accident while I was in college and I hurt my knee in the accident. But even after my knee sort of healed back up, I found that I couldn't sleep. I was drinking more. I developed this kind of like weird, like nervous twitch, like under my eye and kind of like nervous eye kind of thing. I was very short with people. And all of this was my body and more than that, like my spirit kind of saying, hey, dude, we need time out. Like something serious happened to us. We need to kind of come over to the bench and get patched up a little bit. And then after I kind of talked it through with some people and worked it through, the trauma began to heal, which is a different healing process than my body, my knee healing. And so I think that the second part of the conversation is identifying trauma, because of the signs that are coming up. And then having the courage and the grace and room around us to do something about it, or to sort of allow ourselves to experience that kind of lavish grace of God at these really hard moments in life. The parallel I sometimes use with folks is like a computer. You drop your computer gets a virus, it's going to let you know. It's going to be slower, it's going to freeze on you at times, things like that.
That was the best freeze I've ever seen anyone do ever. I want to affirm you in your freeze.
I'm not good at much, but I can freeze. I appreciate that. And you can sort of just be like, oh, my computer's broke, man, it's terrible, it's too bad. Or, God willing, you can sort of take it to get it fixed. I think it's similar with trauma. Like we can sort of name, yeah, I'm broken, like I'm really struggled, but we're broken yet beloved. And we can allow ourselves to sort of get patched up by, I don't know, the great computer fix-it person in the sky, kind of patch us up.
Mm-hmm. So this is good. This is so good. This question is going to maybe sound like one that we addressed a little bit earlier, and that is, in the midst of like trying to adapt, trying to innovate, trying to do everything in a new way. I use this metaphor, this image of I had to throw out my 2019 playbook, and I also had to throw out the playbook that I thought I was going to abide by, in January, February. And so every single day feels like everything is a thing. Like the days are full, even though I don't leave my house. And so it could be easy to abandon self-care practices. If you just had to encourage other church leaders, like one go-to when it feels like the day is just too full or holds too many realities, what's a go-to practice that you're like, this is the one that you could do in 5 minutes? For me, it's I've actually been leaning into the music of my birth, gospel music, songs that kind of come out of this oral tradition of call and response. And I hear the psalmist in Psalm 23 saying, goodness and mercy shall follow you all the days of your life. I'm like, okay, God, I can't chase after you. I need to have something that comes to me. So I'll just listen to a song in the morning or a song in the evening that I'm like, I need God's goodness and mercy to chase after me. But what would you say is kind of like a go-to if you only had 5 minutes that people could lean into?
Always gratitude for me. It's always gratitude, because I'm usually in a scarcity mindset. And if I can switch over to an abundant mindset, and if I can think of what I have, think of all the people in the world that have so much less than me. And this is such a privilege to be able to do this work. And it's such a privilege that God entrusted these people to me, or these gifts to me, or whatever if I can just switch that mindset to gratitude, it will usually get me through the hard part.
I would add that addition and subtraction. And I think that if I had just 5 minutes, I would spend that 5 minutes at the very beginning of the day and add to that some time, preferably reading through God's word, and not in a kind of prep for a sermon, nor in a kind of let me deep dive theologically and figure this out, but to kind of move to the spots that have brought comfort in the past. And so I've always been drawn to the life of David. And so throughout this thing, I kind of I've been reading David again, not preaching from it, not writing a paper about it, but that was my favorite stories when I was a little person growing up. And I love it now. And I know what's going to happen. It's not going to be different this time when I read it. So that's the addition, I think, sort of adding to a spiritual practice. But then subtraction, again, with the other 3 minutes I would have left, I would encourage people to go into your calendar and postpone and cancel meetings. And it's hard because I think it feels like I can't do that. I'm important and they need me. But the reality is for most things, very few things are super urgent. This is an urgent moment, but the person who just wants to catch up, or the kind of quick committee meeting thing, it can happen tomorrow, usually. And maybe I don't even need to be a part of this conversation. And kind of opening up that little block on my Outlook calendar, and there's such relief and grace in saying no. We're saying yes, but can we put this off a week? The things that we can. There's some calls we can't cancel and postpone, and I have those too. But again, if I had 5 minutes, I would love to sort of type out emails I'm really sorry, I kind of need a day for myself. And you know who you should talk to? My colleague over here. Or there's another person who'd be amazing, and I love you. It's totally not you, it's me. It's not you, it's me. But getting out of stuff, it to me is not as important, but a close second to sort of diving into things that sort of give me life.
Yeah, I think it could either be oversimplistic or come across as over spiritual. I don't know, but I think it's in rhythm with what you guys are saying. I think prayer is the only thing I would encourage any person who is seeking to lead into a place of faith. That's the one thing that we cannot abandon. And sadly, I think many of us are realizing the deficiency connective to prayer in seasons of time like now, where the pronounced and outward gifts aren't really as useful in the way that they used to be, in the way of preaching and teaching and being in front of a lot of people. And I think if we're not working from rest, that assurance that God is the one who is the true sustenance for any of the work that we do, we're going to be in a bad way. So I just think prayer, 5 minutes of prayer, can change a lot of things, especially if we invoke listening into our prayer. I think that's the other thing that maybe a lot of times people in leadership, we don't do well. Again, Eugene Peterson said listening is in short supply when he was talking about pastoral leadership. And I think that that's a great value. So prayer can introduce that into our rhythm in a regular way.
I think they've hit a lot of the high points that certainly things that I would would agree with and try to practice myself. I keep going back to what Anne said before about needing to know what you need, know yourself well enough to know what you need, because I think some of these are universal things that are always going to be good, but it may be harder for some people to do some of them than others for whatever reason. And some things may be more restorative for some than others, you know, at different times, maybe something different. So the one thing I will throw out for me, the two things came to mind immediately, just for me personally, beauty. I spend, hymns come to mind, so I'm with you on the hymns, sort of. I feel like that's something that when I need something, when I'm feeling lost, I tend to, music and hymns in particular come to mind. The other piece, I go into poetry a lot. I read a lot of poetry. Like, is there somebody in addition to the scripture that helps me feel grounded and reminds me of what is beautiful, good, and true. You know, we're invited to, you know, whatever is beautiful, whatever is right, think on these things. Like, what helps me think on the things I need to be thinking about, as opposed to all of the anxiety things and all of the comparison things and all of the anxious things and all of the fearful things and all of the responsibilities and the to-do list and what reminds me of all the things we've been saying this whole conversation. And for me, I have certain poets that help me, that do that for me in short, like, it's like, oh yeah. When despair for the world grows in me, I remember the peace of wild things, says Wendell Berry. You know, like, I can, you know, give me some Hafiz, give me some Mary Oliver. You know, there are certain voices that read a dove. I mean, like, just give me. So that's one thing I would add. And I'm also, the other thing that comes to mind, and I haven't said this, I just want to say it. One of the things that I've been practicing and do every month usually, but I'm doing every 2 weeks right now, is meeting with my clergy women's group. I haven't necessarily talked about those kinds of accountability. We talked about people, having your people. I just want to name that. We're meeting every other week at 7:30 in the morning. And this is a crew that we've been together a long time. We trust each other. I mean, so we can name what's going on. Like, if we feel like we're sliding down a slope, we can tell the truth. And people will recognize too the signs that we're not dealing with trauma well. Somebody say, what's going on? Or ask a question that helps us see ourselves. So I would just say that's another thing that I would encourage people to do. I'm terrible at reaching out for help when I'm in a bad place. I'm terrible at it. But I would say that's another good thing to try to do. If you're feeling overwhelmed, somebody who can help you get some perspective, make some of those decisions, encourage you to do the things we're talking about. Because sometimes I need help and permission from someone else when I'm, for whatever reason, can't do it for myself.
No pressure to our panelists, but before we kind of transition to the close of our episode, are there any last thoughts, just words that you want to offer up to those who might be listening in and watching today? I'm oftentimes reminded that our words create worlds, and sometimes just to hear someone just offer a word can be like a healing balm. So just any last thoughts that you want to share with viewers in regard to self-care?
I think immediately for me, I just am compelled to share something that I wish I'd heard a lot earlier, that you're not alone inside of your journey toward finding rest. It feels as though you're left to your own resources and devices to be able to climb out of this, what feels like inescapable hole of the cycle of maybe depression or burnout or disillusionment, feeling like you aren't measuring up. And I just want to encourage you to know and give yourself permission to acknowledge that you are like so many of us, myself included, who have had to take that look inward to figure out what I'm feeling, as Ginger has said so well, but then also bring that before others and before God, saying, I don't want to try to continue to do this on my own. And it's a lie that you have to either choose to completely tap out of what it means to follow the way of Jesus, or continue to push forward even though you find yourself completely disillusioned with all of the work that you're doing. There is rest available. It comes at the hand of the finished work of Jesus. And I think if we enter into that process, we can find that refreshment.
Anyone else?
What's coming to mind for me is just that God sees your faithfulness. Like, God sees every little thing you're doing that may feel like nobody sees it, you know? It's like you don't have someone in the office there who sees you putting in the late hours, or that extra phone call, or all of it, like whatever, all the little stuff that you're doing and that you're being faithful to. And that can be self-care, or that can be like just work, you know, the grind, like the daily grind, like all the people out there who figured out the technology like in a minute flat for their communities and have been innovative and have been resilient. Like, God has seen every single act of courage and faithfulness, and like it matters, and like God sees it, and I think delights in every single thing that you've done. So I just want to encourage people that way. Like, sometimes it feels like these lives are hidden now, right? It's like we're not getting maybe all that normal affirmation that we might get just from the encouraging people that we pass, you know, in a normal circumstance. And like, just to remember, like, even if no one else in the world sees those small acts, like God is seeing every single piece that you're pouring forth into your ministry.
I appreciate that, Anne. That's rich, you know. I think the last thing I would say would be around, you don't have to be perfect. We were working on our graduation recording for our university, for our graduating seniors whose senior year just hasn't been what they thought it was going to be. And, you know, they sort of sent me my little link to upload my invocation, and they sent the deans who are giving their part of it, and the speakers, and there's like a home music component to the whole thing. And the producer of it sort of sent me a message later and was like, this doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, excuse the language, he says, this is going to suck, but what we want is for everybody to do their best. And then we'll go with what we got from there. And it was such a little thing, because before he sort of sent that, I'd recorded this thing like 7 times. And I was like, the lighting's kind of bad on this one. And I tried it again. I was like, like I'm messing up words in ways I would never trip if this was a live ceremony. It'd be great. And like, we kind of march in the stadium, we kind of smile and take a picture. But here I'm like, this has got to be right. I got to get this, the perfect take. And there was such grace in being reminded that, dude, this does not have to be perfect. And I think that's true for all of the like home church services, or the kind of encouraging emails or texts or sermons, or what we're trying to write together. We don't have to be perfect. And along with that, we also don't have to be productive. I mean, I think I felt such grace from people who said, like, their voices out there saying, like, this is the perfect time to write that book. And like, yeah, there's truth in that kind of, but it's also like, you don't have to write that book. We're going through, like I said earlier, a major trauma. And it's okay if you need to like take a couple days, weeks, months, and watch bad TV, and like, you know, sneak a couple extra pieces of chocolate every now and then too. Like, you don't have to be perfect in the presentation, nor do we have to be perfect in kind of what we're doing in our personal lives. That doesn't mean we don't aim for holiness. But the gift, I think, of Christianity is it's not a religion that demands perfection. We're saved by grace. We don't sort of work our way towards salvation, nor do we work our way towards like excellence in the field. This is all just the total amazing grace, I think, of our God. And we do well to remember that.
You know, I end our conversations asking this question, and that is, where are you finding hope today? And today, as I sit in this place, not just as a pastor, but also as a person, a human being, I think about the places that bring me hope as being like manna for me. And in hearing our beautiful panelists speak, I'm also reminded that before manna falls to the ground, it says that God places a dew on the ground. God is even attentive about the food that we eat in the wilderness. And because God cares for us in that way, then we can also care for ourselves as we're also caring for others. So I hope that however you think about that question, what's bringing you hope, that you might be reminded that God even provides the hope on a beautiful platter for you, that you might rehearse God's goodness. I want to thank our panelists for their honesty, for their vulnerability, and for the ways in which they've been beautiful co-laborers with one another and with you this day. We want to thank our sponsor, Amplify Media, for creating this beautiful webinar series, and hope that you will learn more about their resources. Today, we talked about what it looks like to kind of find space for self-care. And next episode, we're going to talk about what does it look like to provide pastoral care for some of our congregants who, for the first time ever, are dealing with personal and financial loss in a way that they've not ever kind of experienced on this magnitude. And so we do hope that you will be a part of that conversation. You can register at amplifymedia.com/now and next. But we just want to thank you again for leaning in, for maybe this was your means of self-care, to take a little time to listen to this webinar. Thanks for being with us.